Right. Is that working? Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so there we go, Iris. Off you go.
Yep.
You got it?
Will when it comes. Ah, there it is.
Oh, that's weird. It's going very slowly.
I can say it.
Right. Yeah. It seems to sometimes delay.
Yep, I've got it.
Yeah, good.
No. Jacob returns to the Holy Land after a 20-year stay in Haran and sends angel emissaries to Esau in hope of a reconciliation. But his messengers report that his brother is on the warpath with 400 armed men. Jacob prepares for war, prays, and sends Esau a large gift consisting of hundreds of heads of livestock to appease him. That night, Jacob ferries his family and possessions across the Jabbok River. He, however, remains behind and encounters the angel that embodies the spirit of Esau, with whom he wrestles until daybreak. Jacob suffers a dislocated hip, but vanquishes the supernal creature, who bestows on him the name Israel, which means he who prevails over the divine.
Oh.
Jacob and Esau meet, embrace, and kiss, but part ways. Jacob purchases a plot of land near Shechem, whose crown prince, also called Shechem, abducts and rapes Jacob's daughter Dinah. Dinah's brothers Simeon and Levi avenge the deed by killing all male inhabitants of the city, after rendering them vulnerable by convincing them to circumcise themselves.
1 second. More coming up. Yeah. Let's see what's going on there.
Jacob journeys on. Rachel dies while giving birth to her second son, Benjamin, and is buried in a roadside grave near Bethlehem. Reuben loses the birthright because he interferes with his father's marital life. Jacob arrives in Hebron to his father Isaac, who later dies at age 180. Rebekah has passed away before Jacob's arrival. Our parsha concludes with a detailed account of Esau's wives, children, and grandchildren, the family histories of the people of Seir, among whom Esau settled, and a list of the 8 kings who ruled Edom, the land of Esau's and Seir's descendants.
Thank you. Sorry, I printed the share in the printer and I completely forgot to get it. So just chat to myself for a minute. I'll go get the share. That would help. Thank you.
I made a mistake last night. I read the rabbi's message saying no shiur tomorrow because he'd got to leave straight after shul, and I thought that it referred to this shiur, but apparently it referred to yesterday morning shiur, and I hadn't. I don't look at my WhatsApp.
Right.
I only looked at it last night and found and misread it.
Yes, if you're like me and you write people emails at midnight, you have to be careful with that. Because, for example,
yes, I'm very sorry.
No. I've done it before. I've sent someone an email at 5 past midnight. It said, "I'll see you tomorrow," and then I've realised I mean later today. So
I only read the email that you'd sent on Saturday night. I only read it last night about just before midnight.
Maybe we should have a separate group for this.
No.
Okay.
Insomniac.
Okay.
There are some groups. There are some groups I'm on.
Rabbi, can I make an observation?
Yeah.
I haven't read anywhere to say that Esau was on a warpath. He has 400 men, but they never said.
Correct. So it's classic piece of strategy, isn't it? That Yaakov does both. He comes prepared for war and he comes ready for peace. He knows that Esav, last he heard, Esav was quite angry with him. Although Rivka said, "I'll let you know when his anger subsides," I'm not sure that ever happened, did it? There's no message to him. So it could go either way. It's a bit like all these people on the Belarusian border or whatever it is. I'm sure they're just there for peaceful reasons.
I meant to say,
Where does it say that
Joe.
the messengers Jacob sent to Esau were angels?
I think Rashi says. I don't know exactly how that works because I don't have angels on my payroll, but I think Rashi says.
I believe reading it.
Right. Let's have a look at a few things here. I think someone touched on this last week. If you had to sort of pick one of the 7, I suppose, patriarchs and matriarchs, well, no, let's stick to patriarchs for a moment. If you had to pick one of the 3 patriarchs who's the sort of father of the Jewish people as we know it, also in terms of how we are referred to, who would you choose?
Jacob.
Jacob.
Why?
Israel.
Right, we're called the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, right? The 12 tribes, that's where we split up and whatever. We are called often the Beis Yaakov. That's what the school's named after, Beis Yaakov, right? There's no school called Beis Avraham, Beis Yitzhak, it's all Beis Yaakov. Kehilas Yaakov. One second. Yeah, Torah Tzivalanu, Morasha, Kehilas Yaakov. Yeah, generate the congregation of Jacob. So, question: who started the Jewish journey?
Abraham.
Right. Who was the one that was prepared to be sacrificed?
Isaac.
Isaac.
Right. Who saved his family in the years of famine?
Joseph.
Joseph.
Right. Who led the people out of Egypt?
Moses.
Who took them into the promised land?
Joshua.
Joshua.
Right. Who was the greatest king? David. Who built the temple?
Solomon.
Right? And then we had prophets through the ages that were the voice of God. And who's the one that we were just saying last week? It's really interesting, by the way. I'll come to that in a minute. Who's the one we were saying last week gets into all kinds of strife is, of course, Yaakov, right? He has tense relationships with his brother. He's got difficulties with his 2 wives, his father-in-law, at least 3 of his children, right? Besides, for the business with Joseph, we know that Reuben, after Rachel's death, Reuben, right, insults his father by moving his bed. Shimon and Levi, of course, the incident with Shechem. So at times he's full of fear. At times he seems to act quite dishonestly. Let's be honest, right? We said this last week. We quoted last week, right? Someone like to read that again from last week? Who'd like to read that?
I'll read it if you like.
Please go for it.
And Jacob answered Pharaoh, the years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespan of my fathers during their sojourns.
Right, a bit old English. We said that last week, right? He said, I've had a hard life. There's a lot of sorrows. A lot of sorrows. Does that come across as a hero, a founding father? Oh, my life has been one long piece of sorrows. The kids, the grandchildren, my brother, just one thing after another. It doesn't bode well, really. So, and we touched on this last week.
On the other hand, he's taking it to heart. He's all his family. He's taking it onto himself.
And some might say it teaches us that life is not smooth and that our heroes are often flawed people.
Exactly.
Interestingly, and unfortunately, I couldn't find the source for this. I don't have the book myself, I don't think. But very interestingly, we have, if you look in the Talmud, you have what we call basically the Talmudic debates, halachic debates, which is often called shakla v'tarya, which is basically give and take, which is the halachic works of Torah. And then you have what we call Agadta, which is the stories. So you'll be learning the Gemara and it will say, I don't know, the school of Hillel said you have to say Shema at this time. The school of Shammai said you have to say Shema at that time.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, we're here.
We're on hold.
It might be Beryl. I don't know if she's on the
that's
phone.
the phone connection, right? And then I hope she's back with us. Beryl, are you back with us? Oh dear, we've lost her. Okay, hopefully she'll come back in a minute.
You've been placed on hold. Please wait.
Mute her for a sec. Okay, and then We have Agata. So, for example, the Gemara will say, Beis Hillel say, you say the Shema by this time, Beis Shammai say by that time. And there was a story once that Beis Hillel, someone from the Academy of Hillel was saying Shema, and Elijah came to him and told him that in heaven they say Shema at 3:00 in the morning. And there was another story of a chap who was wandering one day, and you'll get all these kind of allegorical stories. So it's actually called Ein Yaakov. It's the Agata. It's the story and midrashim that we find in the Talmud. We often find midrashim that are quite colorful. So there is an introduction to the Ein Yaakov called Mavo. Oh, I just saw it. I think Mavo HaAgata, which means introduction to all the Agata stories. Agata is like Haggadah. It means stories, basically, as opposed to kind of halachic works. Sections of the Talmud that are more allegorical. So in that introduction, according to Rabbi Sachs, and also in an essay which is written by a chap called Tzvi Hirsch, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Chajes. He was Polish, so probably Chayes or something like that. And unfortunately, I couldn't find the source of that either because I wanted to look at it in the original. It basically says that it's kind of, we touched on it last week, we have this black and white image of Jacob is all good and Esau is all bad, and everything Jacob does must be good and everything Esau does we assume is bad, even though that's not necessarily the case. And when they reconcile this week, Esau seemingly overcomes his inclination to try to murder people, is actually friendly to his brother. And we mentioned before that Yaakov's sons, Shimon and Levi, although they were very well brought up, were renegades that went off and started a massacre. So people don't fit into neat boxes. But he says in the introduction to the Agata that for the purpose of the lessons that we learn, and basically as a kind of midrash, because otherwise it would be too gray, that the Torah is very subtle, things are a lot of gray areas. But when we tell these stories to our kids, if you like, and when we sort of try to learn lessons from these stories, we kind of simplify everything into black and white, right? So this guy's good and that guy's bad. In reality, we know from Tanya also that's not really the case, that people are complex and they get pulled in different directions. And human beings are complex. And yes, there is such a thing as a perfect tzaddik. I don't know, certainly our patriarchs were tzaddikim, but human beings are complex. So he's this Rabbi Chayas, if you pronounce it that way, says based on the introduction to the Agata that basically, no, it's not as simple as we make out, but for the purposes of learning lessons and droshas and midrash and basically, what we teach our kids, we kind of oversimplify it. We make them into pantomime villains, essentially. I thought it was quite an interesting idea. So there is a recognition in the traditional sources and commentaries that life is not as black and white as people might make out, but it's easier to understand it that way. It gets very, if you're going to start understanding everyone as being multidimensional characters, makes it harder to learn lessons. Now, you might turn around and say, on the other hand, though, that's when we run into difficulty because we get our heroes are flawed. And then we say, well, how could he be so great if he cheated his brother or whatever?
Are they not just examples of how people really are? We are a reflection of them, and if we're in God's image, and God made all these people in this image, then we can learn from their behaviors, both positive and negative.
Yeah, and it's the complexity of the human being that we have free choice and we have different inclinations. But basically he says there, yes, we do often oversimplify it, and no, it's not as black and white as we like to make out. And maybe Esau does get a bit of a bad press, possibly Ishmael as well. But the fact is, look, you could say the same thing with the story of Yitzhak and Ishmael. We have a very clear narrative of how we understand it. Muslims have a very different narrative of how they understand it.
They're both right.
And
both wrong.
I don't think there's evidence that Ishmael was necessarily a bad guy. He just was. He was the Prince Harry. He wasn't the designated successor.
Yeah.
Actually, the only thing we hear to his discredit is the fact that as a child, as a boy, he made fun of his little brother.
Yes.
And as a man, he married unsuitable women. But those are the only things we actually hear about him doing anything wrong, isn't it?
Right.
Is there anything else?
But I think since time immemorial, Jewish children, when they were rebel, have said something to their parents, you know, I'll go marry who I want and there's nothing you can do about it, right?
Yeah.
It's a very
A
old
reflection of
problem.
reality.
But they're hardly major crimes, are they?
There was an interesting case, by the way. I ever told you about the case about the chap that sued his grandmother's estate? It was a case in America. I don't think I ever kept it. I had a digital. Basically, there was a Jewish family, and I think it was the grandmother or the grandfather. I don't remember which. One of the grandparents left instructions in their will that, you know, I hereby leave whatever it was. Say it was $100,000. I don't know, whatever it was, a sum of money to each of my grandchildren on condition that they marry Jewish. So one of the grandchildren married out. I don't know if they married out or someone reformed, whatever. Anyway, they married out. They lost their entitlement. What do you do in America when you lose something? You sue somebody. So they sued the estate, or I don't know exactly who they sued. I presume the estate or the executors or whatever, on the grounds it was a violation of their fundamental human rights, because it's a fundamental human right to marry whoever you want, right?
It's also a fundamental human right to leave your
right. So I think it's totally ridiculous, because the grandmother never said you can't marry who you want. She simply said, I'll give you all the money if you marry a Jew. Right? Had she said, I forbid, you know, put some physical impediment to their marriage. So the other thing about it is it doesn't smell right, because at the end of the day, even if you think that's bigoted and racist and so on, the fact is that's what the grandparent did. So you know what? Don't take the money. Stand on principle. Say, I don't want your money. So basically they sued. I think they actually won.
They won. Yes, I heard of this before.
But it's the sort of thing where it grates on you that even if legally they were right, morally, clearly they knew what the grandparents' intention was, and it was a real chutzpah. But anyway, yes, the people's right to Ishmael married some from bad stock or whatever. Anyway, but
Esau married Hittites, didn't he? He married somebody that his parents didn't approve of.
Yes.
Did they disown him as a result of that, or did he just choose to be disowned?
It's interesting. I don't know. It's interesting also, of course, we know that people say, where's it saying in the Torah you can't marry out? Where's it saying in the Torah that it goes by the mother? We know the answer. It says in the Torah that your sons will be drawn after their daughters, and they will take their daughters. I don't remember the exact phrase, but basically alludes to the idea that the woman is the linchpin in all of this. So it's interesting that we seem to be particularly concerned with who all the boys are marrying. If they marry, nobody says, oh, if you go marry someone from this tribe, maybe you can influence them to be like you. They don't seem to have much faith in the ability of maybe men are naturally more peer-led, right? I don't know. It's interesting if you think about it. You know, oh gosh, no, if he marries one of them, he'll be led astray. We never seem to hear it for the women so much. Anyway.
So much better.
So why Jacob? Let's have a look. So as Rabbi Sachs says, Judaism, what if you had to use one adjective to describe a Jew, perhaps in slight humor, what's the adjective you might well use? Look at Jewish history, the end of Fiddler on the Roof, they all pack their bags.
Ready to escape.
Right, the wandering Jew. Yeah, the homeless Jew, the wandering Jew, the nomadic Jew. We're always on a journey. We're always going somewhere. We're always getting ready to leave. I found it very interesting that Margaret Hodge said that her father said to always have a bag packed?
Yeah.
You know, she sounds extremely English. She's got a title, you know, and yet, you know, she said that. I knew somebody whose mother was a refugee from Germany. She was a very respected doctor in the community. She was as English as you could get. She always made sure her passport was up to date. They had a saying by Hasidim in Russia that the minhag was to always have a current passport and keep it somewhere nearby. You never knew when you would need it. You know, as no matter how comfortable Jews felt, this sense of having your bag packed or having your passport up to date.
Isn't that really the basis of why Jews tend to go for professions like doctor, lawyer, jeweler, because they're things that they can take with them as a worker. They're
Yes.
things they've got a profession wherever they go.
And yet,
jewelry, for example,
yes,
it's small but valuable. You can tuck them in your pocket,
yes,
and you've got money to use when you get wherever
I
you're
would
going.
definitely agree with you, and I've often thought that. And yet, if you look today, many Jews are in property. Now, if you ask the South African Jews, having property didn't help you when you had to leave quickly. Right? Many South Africans left their wealth behind.
That must be because the persecution.
Sorry?
Persecution is not as overt in many ways. You don't have to think about, if I have to run, how many people actually of my generation think I might have to leave the country, therefore I need to make sure I've got a job that I can do when I get wherever I'm going.
Yeah, I think, look, even with all the Jeremy Corbyn, I would say fear mongering, it was very real. You know, how many people would maybe some more people thought maybe I'll make Aliyah. I mean, French Jews have definitely increased their Aliyah both to Israel and to England over the last 5-10 years because of anti-Semitism in France.
But we don't have this sense that we
No,
must have a
no, it's not a sense of urgency. I mean, if you go back to, many South Africans made hard choices to leave their wealth behind because they wanted to get out because it was so dangerous. How many of us
they were Jews or because they were white?
Probably both. But how many of us have because they were white, probably. How many of us have sat down and said, okay, if I had to leave tomorrow, I'd have to leave behind, I don't know, I might lose my home, I might lose my inheritance, I might lose my. People that go on Aliyah at the best of times struggle to restart their careers. What you say, Iris, is, I mean, the truth is being in the legal profession isn't so portable because you have to retrain and doctors have to retrain,
Similarly.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
But yes, so Judaism is, as much as it's a faith, it's a journey. It begins with the journey of Avraham and Sarah, right? What's the first thing they're told? Leave your land, of course.
Bags and go.
Get up and go. We have lots of get up and go. Journey of Avraham and Sarah to an unknown destination. The journey, of course, across the desert for 40 years and into the promised land. And in fact, if you look in the Parsha of Masai, when it describes the journeys, it doesn't even use the word sekel. It says they camped. They left one place and they camped in another. They camped in this, they camped in that. Right? It almost seems like we never settle down. When we settle down, we're in danger. Very interesting. And that's a metaphor as well. When we become too settled, we become too comfortable, either physically or spiritually. Let's see what it says in Devarim. So what Moshe says. Who'd like to read?
I'll read. When you have children and grandchildren and have been established in the land for a long time, you might become decadent. I suppose you read assimilated for that.
Right. I'm not sure decadent is the best translation. It says, I can't think what the original Hebrew is now. I should have printed it. But yeah, you basically become complacent. You become too comfortable. And then when you're comfortable, you forget often what's really important. You forget your identity, right? And as Margaret Hodge said, she touched on something. What was the book about? Was it Bernard Wasserman? Is that his name? The historian, Bernard Wasserman. Is that his name?
I think so.
Wrote a book a number of years ago about how anti-Semitism has basically kept Jewish identity alive. It's a very negative identity, but look, it's like they say in Israel, when there's a war, everyone pulls together. When you're under siege and you're under threat, people suddenly come out of the woodwork. When things are quiet and hunky-dory and everything's great, people become very comfortable and settled and, assimilated, essentially. It's true. It's true, unfortunately. So Moshe warns us about that. He says, once you become established, you become settled. Settled can have a double meaning, right? Settled can mean, and by the way, what's the word we use to dwell in a land, to live there is lashevet, to settle, to sit, right? To sit in the land, to settle. So on the one hand, it's good to be settled, right? Mentally, certainly. On the other hand, comes with a danger. When you're too settled, you're too comfortable, quite literally. So, yeah.
I've just looked it up. It says corrupt.
Thank you. That's interesting. So it's actually worse than that. It's saying you can be easily corrupted because you become too comfortable. There could be some truth in that as well. You know, one of the things that we often hear is that people forget that we're in Galut and they behave in certain ways, religious Jews sometimes particularly, behave in certain ways that if they would actually feel like they're on show and, you know, a pogrom could start tomorrow if you double park, they might not do it. But we don't live in that kind of a world, right? We're a bit too comfortable, particularly in Jewish areas. We're very comfortable. So that sense of corruption, that takes it even further, I think. It's more than just being comfortable. It's actually being, you know, wrong and corrupt and not good. So how do we avoid that? We have constant reminders of where we came from, right? You were strangers in the land. You must always remember the exodus from Egypt. Remember how your ancestors lived in booths. Go out to your garden for 7 days a year, 8 days a year to remember Sukkot. Remember that, you know, we said before, I think, was it 80 something times the Torah tells us to be kind to strangers because we were strangers in the land? You know, constant reminders of where we came from. Why? Because we shouldn't be too comfortable. It's a metaphor for many things. We shouldn't be too comfortable physically because then we stand still. And spiritually also, why shouldn't we be too comfortable? Because this world is not our final destination. So we should recognize that there's a purpose to life and there's a balance between the spiritual and the physical. And there's a tension between heaven and earth. I'm sure we've probably mentioned before the idea, I don't know where it's from, but why does a kosher species have split hooves? Because you need, on the one hand, you need to be grounded, you need to be connected to the ground, right? A circuit needs to be earth, the person needs to be grounded. Nobody wants a person, you know, it's nice, it's cute when you're 5 years old and you have daydreams, you know, when you're 35 years old and you have a wife and kids and you're not grounded, you know, and I don't know, you go out one day and you wander off for a couple of days in the forest. Oh, I was just reciting poetry in the forest in Tzfat. You know, I was communing with the Almighty God. Or, you know, are you going to get a job? No, God will provide, you know, and there are people like that, you know, very flighty people who have no grounding. And you don't want someone like that marrying your son or daughter. You worry about it because, you know, how are they going to provide for their family? They have no sense of, they're like an overground child. So on the one hand, you have to be grounded. Even if you're a spiritual person, you have to be grounded. We don't want people that are on these kind of like go off in these spiritual kind of, you know, trips basically and have no concept of reality. That's not the Jewish way. The Jewish way is to build a family, to have a home, to put a roof over your head, to get a job and work the land, the blood and sweat, as we learn from Bereshit. At the same time, you need a separation between yourself and the ground, which is the split hoof. Because if you're just completely, totally grounded, and there's no higher purpose, there's nothing else besides this world and its material comforts, that's not the purpose of life. So the purpose of life, according to the Torah, is to live in this world for a higher purpose. Live in this world, you need to work, you need to hopefully have a family, you need to provide for your family, you need to put bread on the table, you need to pay the bills, we need to worry about all these things. Once a week, we have a day off from that, Shabbos. And the rest of the time, we should know that there's a higher purpose. And whilst we're doing all these things, which can be very cumbersome and very mundane and sometimes very, very time-consuming and troubling, we should know that that's not the ultimate purpose of life. We always say that's why we call up a bridegroom at an ofroth. Because I don't know about nowadays, but once upon a time, when you got married, that's when you moved in together and suddenly you have to start paying a mortgage on your own home. Till now, you're living with your parents, obviously. So you're about to suddenly have all these responsibilities. And the message we give to Chatan is, we call you up to the Torah, that there's a higher purpose in life. It's a very important message. So maybe it's the same idea with the journey, says, as Rabbi Sachs says as well, that we're always camping out temporarily. We never, what do you call it? We never
settle down.
Too settled. I'm trying to think, well, there was one Rebbe or something that somebody once came to his house, and where is the Chafetz Chaim? Maybe I don't remember. Somebody came to his house and he had a very simple furniture. And they said, "How can you live with such simple furniture?" And he asked him, you know, when you go on holiday and you stay in an inn, you know, do you bring all your, you know, your three-piece suite with you and your dining table and your chairs and your, you know, four-poster bed or whatever? He says, of course not. Why not? He says, because it's temporary. He said, okay, so my sojourn in this world is also temporary. I don't need creature comforts. Okay, some of us do need creature comforts, but it's an idea that we don't get too settled. We don't become too comfortable. We have this, it's interesting, tension, right? Is tension a good thing?
Depends its purpose. Generally less, because it keeps you on your toes.
Right. So you have certain tensions. So often we say opposites attract. So you might have a couple that the husband is very organized and the wife is very disorganized, and there's a certain tension between them, but they find a balance. Or the husband is a strict disciplinarian and the wife is very kind and giving and, full of, no boundaries. And they have to bring up the kids together, and there's a tension sometimes, but you find a balance. Or maybe you have, I don't know, the rabbi wants to spend all the money and the treasurer says you can't spend any money. So there's a tension and the pulling in different directions, and you somehow find a balance. So we have the same tension with the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, the good and the bad inclination. So having tension, right? This is Yaakov, by the way. What's Yaakov called? Yisrael, but he struggled with God. So struggle and tension is not automatically a bad thing. We have to be careful with mental health and with person's well-being. But the idea of living in a state of flux is a very Jewish idea, that we're constantly being pulled in different directions of choices. Tension is not automatically a bad thing, right? Surface tension is definitely not a bad thing, right? It helps things to flow. So tension is not automatically a bad thing. Tension between physical and spiritual, tension between, our Jewish identity and our British identity. We are physical beings, and we also have a soul, and there's a constant tension between them. So if that's the case, and if settling is a bad thing, and if journeying and growing and being constantly on the move is a very Jewish concept. Now let's come back to the patriarchs. So what are Avram's journeys? There are 2 times, actually, I hadn't even spotted this, but I realize now, 2 times that Avram is told Lech Lecha. Oh, whoops, 1 second. Before we do that, Mr. Source, 1 second. Oops. Oh, yes. So God himself tells us that you can't sell the land of Israel permanently, right? We know that in the Yovel, all land sales would be cancelled. Yes? There was no such thing as permanent ownership of land in Eretz Yisrael. How this works practically, I don't know. But there was this very important idea that the land is not yours to sell or to buy. Let's see what God says in the Parsha of Bahar. Who would like to read?
I will.
Yeah.
But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me.
Right? We're strangers in the land. Even the land of Israel, it's not our land. God says it's my land. There you go. Solves all the arguments. It's God's land. So
isn't that true of all the world?
Possibly. So you can have basically a leasehold, but you can't have a freehold. I mean, clearly you can buy and sell land, and people do. I believe, by the way, there is a reflection of this in the modern day state of Israel, which might also reflect its socialist roots. If I'm not mistaken, someone might know better than me. Doesn't KKL have some whole system of ownership of land? And if you buy a plot of land, it's somehow leasehold rather than there's no such thing as freehold or something like that. I don't know. I'm sure there's something like that. Michael might know. I'm sure there's something like that. Anyway, the Torah tells us clearly, it's my land. You're just here temporarily to enjoy it while you can. So let's go back to Avram. What's Avram told? Right? Lech lecha. I'll read this because I should put Hebrew as well. We had this a few weeks ago. God says to Avram, Lech lecha, go for yourself, go to yourself from your land and from your father's house. Okay, and when's the other time that God tells him Lech lecha? Actually is the Akedah. He says, Kach na es binchas b'chirascha she'ahavta, take your son, your only son whom you love, v'lech lecha el Eretz Moriah, go to land of Moriah. So both of these are very unknown journeys, right? In the first case, he says, go to the place I'm going to tell you without telling him what it is, leave your father's house. And the second time he says, take your son and go to Moriah. And again, there's a clear lack of certainty. So Avram, of course, what does he do? He says, how high should I jump? He basically goes. Both these journeys are pretty awful journeys. Avram's told to leave his home, everything that's familiar to him, with absolutely no idea where he's going. Then he's told to take his son, and the implication certainly is that he's going to offer him up. So Avram takes these pretty horrendous journeys, pretty treacherous journeys in the spiritual sense and the mental, treacherous journey isn't just a physical journey. It can be, the mental exhaustion and the spiritual anguish here. And yet Avram does it. He does it without question. He even gets up early in the morning to do it. What about Yitzchak?
We don't know that he didn't question. We only know that it's not written down that he didn't question. We don't know what he was feeling or what he was feeling. He must have been very...
No, but does Yitzchak travel? So interestingly, what does Avram say to his, to Eliezer?
Go and find me a
wife.
Right, and don't take Yitzchak there. Basically, I don't want him to leave the Holy Land. And the one time he does leave, he goes to the land of the Philistines. We read about. It's quite limited, right? It says he lived in Gerar. We had that recently, but it's quite limited compared to Avraham and Yaakov. He doesn't wander all the time. There's like basically one journey we're told about, and the story with wells and whatever. But it's quite limited. Generally speaking, he doesn't seem to travel. Avram travels. He has to go on quite treacherous, daunting journeys where he's no idea what the destination is. What about Yaakov?
I've often thought, Rabbi, that when Jacob went to find his wife, he being a cousin, he's never met her before. Didn't they have any family get-togethers and things when the children were smaller, or were they a long way away?
Are you a long way away? I don't know. Maybe people did it on Zoom. People look different on Zoom. I'm guessing that. Look, we had a great uncle of mine that went to the States, and like nobody saw him for 50 years, basically, even though it's not that far. Nobody saw him. It was just people.
In my family, we all lived around Walthamstow. All my mother's family, my father's family, all lived somewhere in close. A lot of them within walking distance of where we lived, but we never saw them.
Right.
We never went to visit. We visited my father's mother once a year, and she lived only 10 minutes walk away.
I think it might be a mindset, by the way.
We just didn't see them.
Right. I have Israeli cousins. My uncle and aunt went on Aliyah in the 1970s when their kids were really young. And I first met them for my bar mitzvah. My parents took me to Israel, basically. And that's when I first met them. I hadn't met them for like 12 years. And after that, you see them every couple of years. I think it's a certain mindset. So certainly in those days, with all the challenges of travel, I suspect, people didn't meet their families, possibly. Anyway, Yitzchak doesn't travel very much. Yaakov, well, he's gone on a few journeys, right? Back and forth. Here and there.
Did his children stay nearby?
Don't know. Good question. He, of course, what happens to him, right? He's fleeing home. He gets nervous he's fleeing from his brother. He lies down. He's nervous. He's scared. He puts the stones around his head, right? And then he's got Lavan, who's not happy about him. And then he goes back to Esau. He's got no idea what's happening there. And then they've got the famine and he has to go down to Egypt. He's always journeying. What happens in his first journey? He has his vision of the ladder, right? Last week, Cedra. No, this week, Cedra, sorry. Wait, no,
this week.
No, last week, Cedra.
This week he gets a dislocated hip.
Yes, last week, Cedra, he has his vision. And what does he say? He has this vision of the angels, and what does he say? He says,
when I come back, I'll make an altar.
Who'd like to read this?
Doesn't he say something about when doesn't he say something about when I come back, I'll make an altar for God?
Don't recall, to be honest. So what does Yaakov say when he has his vision? Who would like to read this?
God is truly in this place, but I did not know it. This must be God's house, and it's the gate to heaven.
So I don't know exactly how this vision worked with the angels and the ladder, but it was clearly quite vivid, because as a result of it, he says, and of course he was right. It was the where the temple would stand. He says, wow, I can feel God here. This is a place of God. This is a holy place. How many people say that they have such a vision? I'm not even sure that Moshe has this kind of a vision that's so striking. And then what happens in our parsha, right? He meets the man who grapples with him, leaves him injured, and he gets a new name, which means one who has struggled with God. And all of these things, it's almost he doesn't initially realize. He says, oh, wow, this must be God's house. What happens later on? Interestingly, when he all his encounters are described in a very specific way. I'll just read the next two to you and you'll see. This is it says, Vayifka b'makom, he came upon a certain place. Vayolan Sham, and he stopped there for the night, for the sun had set, and that's when he took out the stones, and that's when he has his vision, right? Vayifka, hold on to that word for a minute. And regarding the end of last week's Seder, it says Yaakov went on his way after meeting with Esau, Vayifku Malachei Elokim, and he encountered angels of God. Lifgoa means almost like a happenstance, like, oh, I just happened to bump into them. It was almost incidental. It wasn't planned. It wasn't scheduled. I wasn't expecting it. I was surprised by Hashem. A pigua, by the way, in modern Hebrew, I'm afraid, is a terror attack, an incident, a happening, right? So I think the connotation is something unexpected. I'm not sure the exact definition, but I think it's something unexpected. So he had an unexpected chance, unplanned encounter. So Yaakov's on these journeys. It's all kind of very erratic almost, right? 1 minute he's fleeing his brother. Suddenly he sees God and angels as he has a vision of God talking to him. And then, he happens to bump into some more angels. He happens to meet, it's very, the phrasing is very casual. It's not a planned thing. With Avram, it's like, go take uproot yourself and go where I tell you. I'm not telling you yet where you're going. With Yaakov, it's that he's running away. And he has these incidental sort of casual encounters almost. So the Rabbi Sachs says, one second, I'll come to that in a minute. Oh, right. Now, what's wrong with being settled? What's wrong with dwelling in peace and tranquility? Next week's Seder is Vayeshev, yes? It starts off Vayeshev Yaakov, Beretz Migrayav, Beretz Canaan. Yaakov dwelt. He's settled. Right? There's no rest for the righteous. Let's see what Rashi says on that. Who would like to read this source 10?
Will I go?
Yes.
Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. Rashi. When Jacob sought to dwell in tranquility, the troubles of Joseph sprang upon him. The righteous seek to dwell in tranquility. Said the Holy One, blessed be he, what is prepared for the righteous in the world to come is not sufficient for them, but they seek also to dwell in tranquility in this world.
Right, so it's rhetorical. Wow. Okay, so basically, in medical circles, you never use the Q word, right? If you walk into, never say in a hospital, oh, it's quiet tonight. They say, shh, don't use the Q word. It's like a superstition. Use the Q word, all hell breaks loose. I said it to fireman once. He said, no, we like action. But so basically, never say, oh, it's nice and peaceful here, because something will go wrong. Actually, there's a deeper point here, of course, which is that according to Rashi, God is saying, who said you're entitled to peace and tranquility? And interestingly, of course, who is it that we talk about dwelling in peace and tranquility in all the prayers for the royal family and for the state of Israel, that Jacob shall again dwell in peace and tranquility with none to make him afraid. Yeah, the truth is he never had peace and tranquility in the first place. Yeah, the one time he thought he had peace and tranquility, all hell broke loose with his sons. So maybe it's the wrong avenue to go down. So Rashi says, no, there's no such thing. You know, the righteous, I'm sorry, but life is difficult in this world. You get your peace and tranquility in the world to come. So the question is, who do we identify with? Do we identify with Avraham, who is, you know, such a faithful servant of God that God says jump and he says how high, which direction? Do we identify with Yitzhak, who stays close to home, doesn't really have to travel too far? Or do I identify with Yaakov, who's basically up and down? He's 1 minute he's on the run, the next minute he's having a moment of spiritual awakening, the next minute he thinks he's finally got some peace and quiet to put his feet up, the next minute his kids are bickering, you know. So Rabbi Sachs says it's Yaakov that we identify with, because that's real life. You know, Avram, it's an amazing thing that Avram is so devoted to God. The 10 tests, whatever God says, he does it. And that's great. It's incredible. Yitzhak has a relatively sedate life, which is not the reality of most of us. But Yaakov's reality is probably most of our own reality. We have moments unexpected. We don't plan, right, I'm going to go to shul today and come home inspired. You know, sometimes we go to shul, it depends on all kinds of factors. Sometimes we daven and we feel very inspired. Sometimes we daven and we feel like, you know, it's by rote. Sometimes maybe we don't daven. You know, sometimes you can go to a Seder, you can have your Seder and it can be an amazing experience. You think, wow, particularly as your children get older and they start saying things at the table and you get nachas from it, or your grandchildren, you know. On the other hand, sometimes you think, oh gosh, that was the same as last year or whatever. So in an ideal world, we would be able to plan all these things, but we don't. And sometimes things come to you in strange moments. And I did a levaya of an old school friend of mine. Sorry, no, not him, his mother, a couple of months ago, I think it was now. And he said to me, I remember when you were away in yeshiva in your year off, he said, and I was a student in Manchester, and you came to visit me. I was probably staying with my grandma at the time. She lived in Manchester. He said, and you came to visit me. He said, and you were so passionate about your learning. He said, it was really amazing. You just seemed so settled. We just said you shouldn't be settled. But anyway, he said, you know, I don't even remember exactly what took place, but he said it was really inspiring. And I said, thank you. And I went away. I thought, that's really interesting. I don't remember that at all. I have no recollection of actually visiting him, but it's nice to have my, you know, path in life validated from time to time by a relatively random person. It's nice when someone says, you know, I could tell that you were enthusiastic about, you know, Torah learning. That's good to know. You know, sometimes we need a reminder, you know. It's nice when someone's, you know, when you've done something and someone says to you, you know, I don't know, you've read a Haftarah, someone says, it's, you know, I could really feel you put a lot of work into that, or I could really feel you believe in what you're saying or what you're doing or whatever. It's nice to feel validated, you know, but those moments are not always planned. They're not always predictable. So Rabbi
I went to a shiur last week or the week before where somebody called Liz Diamond was doing information using art, a painting by Rembrandt of Yaakov, being held by the angel.
Right.
And the questions that we had to answer, we had to look, it was very inspiring because it was such a different way of learning, a different way of looking at the same things that we're looking at now. And I just wonder if we, as an education tool, we should perhaps look at different ways of how we can look at the same things. It was very inspiring.
Right. What?
It was through LSJS.
Right.
It was just a. You know,
well, so there you're doing it with a visual stimulus.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
By Rembrandt.
Makes a lot of sense. I have a friend. I mean, I haven't spoken to him in years. There's a guy I was in yeshiva with, who he'd had an epiphany. What was his epiphany? I don't know exactly what happened. I guess he grew up in a traditional family, and he was at university, and his mother told him, you must go to a Pesach Seder, you know, or I'll set shiva for you, or whatever it was. So he phoned up the rabbi, and the rabbi said, sure, come round, no problem. And why don't you come and help us prepare the Seder? And somehow he ended up, I don't know exactly how this happened, but he ended up being there for B'dikas Chometz the night before. And Have you ever wondered what happens if you hide your 10 pieces of bread and you can't find one? You've got a problem. You've got a big problem. Right?
Panic.
Yeah, you've got a big problem because now you know you've got chametz in your hand. So there's a whole chapter of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, that deals with this question. I don't remember what the answer is, by the way, but it talks about it. What happens if you lose one of them? So evidently, what one of the rabbis
Why for children to find it?
So yeah, so what we do is we make sure one of the kids hides them and remembers where they are. Sometimes even write them down. But anyway, in this story, I think one of the rabbi's kids had lost it or couldn't find it, or whatever. So the rabbi says, right, I'll go look up the halacha, what to do. And my friend was so impressed by this lifestyle that considers every possible eventuality, that he found that very inspirational. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, that's typical hair splitting, who cares? God knows that you didn't mean to lose the chametz, get over it, move on with your life. But he found that very inspiring. Now, not everyone would, and some people find all kinds of things inspiring. I've heard people, I've sometimes been to a talk or something which I thought was dreadful, and people said, oh, it was really inspiring. So we don't know. So
actually, about that chametz, when you actually nullify the chametz, you say that
anything else that's left,
anything that whether I know it's
correct.
there or not.
Yeah, so I think you do cover it. It's probably not the end of the world, but that's the way he told the story, and he said that's what inspired him. Everyone has different inspiration. People. I'm sure I told you the story of the guy I knew, a Russian guy in Montreal who was moving house. I'm sure I've told this story before. He told the story of how he became Shomer Shabbat. He said that he grew up, he was a secular Russian Jew. He phones up this company, says, I'd like to book a removal, moving from A to B, and I'd like to move on Saturday, whatever it was, 23rd of July. The guy on the other end says, I can't do that. It's the Jewish Sabbath. He says, well, I'm Jewish and it doesn't bother me. He says, are you Jewish? And the chap says, no, but I'm assuming from your name you are. His name is Goldstein. He says, I believe in God. He says, your God will forgive you for breaking the Sabbath, but he won't forgive me for encouraging you or for empowering you, whatever. He said he got off the phone. He was like, he's like, white, like, what is going on? What just happened to me? This non-Jew basically just destroyed my world. He said he was so affected by that this non-Jew cared more about Shabbos than he did, that he started keeping Shabbos, basically. He's been doing it for like 30 years since. Different things inspire different people. So, but this idea that, it's the classic one, why do righteous suffer as well? So this idea that we should have tranquility, that sounds quite harsh, but the other way of understanding is tranquility means familiarity, and familiarity breeds contempt. And the challenge is to keep things new and fresh and not become settled and comfortable.
Tranquility also means peace. And
right. Peace is not about...
Who doesn't want to...
absolutely. That? Right. And people often say, I say to... Sometimes when the kids are arguing, I say to Blim, I want a quiet life. She says, well, you don't get one with 9 kids. It's whatever, one day, please God, they'll all grow up. Anyway, let's see what Rabbi Sachs has to say in conclusion. Right, who would like to be Rabbi Sachs today? Well, not be him, but read him. Any volunteers?
In the voice.
Go on, then.
Go on.
The point is not just that Jacob is the most human of the patriarchs, but rather that at the depths of his despair, he is lifted to the greatest heights of spirituality. He is the man who encounters angels. He is the person surprised by God. He is the one who, at the very moments he feels most alone, discovers that he is not alone, that God is with him, that he is accompanied by angels. Jacob's message defines Jewish existence. It is our destiny to travel. We are the restless people. Rare and brief have been our interludes of peace, but at the dark of night, we have found ourselves lifted by a force of faith we did not know we had, surrounded by angels we did not know were there. If we walk in the way of Jacob, we too may find ourselves surprised by God.
So Rabbi Sachs turns around and says, actually, those are the greatest moments of spirituality. It's not when you're just sitting, resting, peaceful. There's no Taurus. There's nothing happening. You're not running away from anyone. You know, life is good and hunky-dory. Says, no, when are the times that you feel God? When are the times that you, it's like the footstep story, right? When are the times that you connect is actually precisely when you have turmoil. It's when you have turmoil. It's when you're on the move. It's when you're traveling. It's when things are going wrong, or you have uncertainties or fears or darkness. That's when you actually have those moments of faith. And that's why we're Bnei Yisrael, or Beis Yaakov, because life is not tranquility and peace and, you know, pure faith like Avraham. Life is not staying local and never really going too far or having too many challenges besides nearly getting killed by your father, like Yitzchak. But life is basically Yaakov. That's the paradigm of Jewish life. And that's why we model ourselves after him. And that's why we're called the Bnei Yisrael. And we'll see, you know, his Soros continues in the coming weeks, of course, with his sons and then having to go to Egypt and all the uncertainties. So it's good to know that if you're thinking, why can't I have a quiet life? Please know that you're in good company, that the greatest of our leaders of our people never had a quiet life.
Yeah.
And it's basically, it's what you make of it. It's how you capture that adversity and triumph from it that makes it all the more special. So there we go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
Just
you.
11 o'clock. Perfect timing. There we go. So
Keep well. Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Have a good day, everyone.
Day, everyone.
Have a good week.
Have a good week.
Thank you very much.
Sally, did you get our?
Bye.
Sally, did you get our message?
I did read the message. Rabbi, did you read the message
Lovely. Okay.
Which message?
from Brenda? Did you
No, from Beth.
send it?
Yeah.
You sent it to the rabbi?
Wait, which message?
Leon,
No.
Leon Graff was taken into hospital last night. He had,
Oh,
Yeah.
do you know where?
no, I don't know
No,
where
she
yet.
didn't say, Barbara. I'll have to give her a ring and find out where.
I wondered because